Welcome, Chuck Todd, first of all, to the Miami Book Fair International on PBS. The book is The Stranger, Barack Obama in the White House. Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, so what's interesting to me as I was reading this book is that this is a legacy book about our sitting president, someone who's still in office. And I wanted to first ask you when you decided that you wanted to write it while he was still in office.
Well, I definitely want to write a book on him. I'm just going to have a front row seat covering him. It was sort of a campaign that I feel like, you know, every presidential campaign that you cover from beginning to end, you do feel a sense of, like, you know, journalistic ownership of. You feel like you know every little thing about it. But this one in particular, I felt like more so in the ground. I had more of a front row seat than I imagined I could have, frankly, because of the opportunities NBC gave me. And so, you know, you're covering an important presidency, and at the same time, it's also, honestly, it's an outlet. When you cover a presidency on television, I can't tell you all the stuff I can't get on air or in print. So part of it also was having an outlet to sort of do all this other reporting that you can't necessarily, you know, get out every day simply because of the limited amount of bandwidth that you have on television. So, you know, so obviously the opportunity to do it was and then you talk about the, you know, sort of a legacy book. I'm not going to pretend this is like, you know, the definitive history of the first 6 years of the Obama presidency. There's a lot of missing pieces in here. What I was trying to do is sort of start the conversation. I view it as a second draft. If the daily reporting is first draft of history, I view this as an attempt at the second draft, and there's going to be third, fourth, fifth, sixth. I mean, look, we're still arguing over George Washington's legacy. You
know, it's interesting you mentioned NBC, though. You are the sitting host of Meet the Press, an important position.
I didn't expect the book to be, I didn't expect to have that job when I took on the book, and, you know, it certainly does, it's certainly unusual, I know that, for others too.
So there's still time left in his presidency,
Absolutely.
Obviously, and you would, I'm assuming, hope that you've had some great interviews with the president before. You think you'll get another one after the book? The book's somewhat critical, obviously.
I do. Look, I think it's funny that you say it. I think there's really, it's a Rorschach book in some ways, because it has been amazing to me. I've gotten heat from the left, I've gotten heat from the right. It's not a liberal defense nor conservative critique. It really is more of, I'll tell you where I wrote it from, was from the prism of Washington, right? Those are the eyes that I watched it through. And this was about how he managed Washington. And then, you know, that's part of his legacy right now. Over time, that could disappear, which I explain at the end of the book. If everything ends right now, then you sit there and say this polarization's a big part of his presidency. He gets a couple more things accomplished, and it can fade into the background. But on the basic premise of Barack Obama's rise to the national stage, which was to try to sort of change our politics, depolarize the country a little bit, on that score, that's where it may come across as critical, because obviously he's going to leave the presidency with the country more polarized than when he entered it.
There was so much enthusiasm and excitement and passion that he built up, and it's easier to build that excitement and passion when you can talk about the excitement and change versus what I think I heard Hillary Clinton saying was, it's going to be tough.
Yeah.
It's not easy to do.
Right.
It's a grind.
But she seems really prescient now, right? When you look back, when she was trying to say, oh, remember, she'd get real sarcastic. Oh, the skies are going to open up. And, you know, she was saying, hey, this guy's in for a rude awakening, which, of course, he was.
It reminded me a lot of when the Clintons came in. They had the same difficulties at the beginning. I think theirs was gays in the military and some other things, and they had he soon moved out his first wave of advisors and sort of understood there was a new reality that he had to face, and it wasn't going to be this sort of easy path. It seemed destined that eventually President Obama was going to have to face that same reality of Washington.
It is, and this is where I don't, look, he had to make a choice early on. This is what his defenders will have said to me and what his former advisors say. He had to make a choice. Do you change Washington or do you get something big done? Because they would argue you can't do both. Because if you change Washington, if you do want to truly change sort of the way the town works, you're going to have to break so much glass that it's going to make legislatively getting stuff done impossible. Like you were going to have to, you're so determined to change the culture. And this happened, there's actually a smaller example of this. Arnold Schwarzenegger, when he became governor of California, he had two paths. Could he do stuff legislatively or try to change the way the state did its budget politics, drew gerrymandered lines and all this stuff? He chose to change the political rules and structures, and it was hard, but he did that. He doesn't have a legacy of legislative achievement, but he can look back and say he gave Jerry Brown more tools to get the job done. And I understand that that was a choice. You could go big on health care, or you could change Washington, but they made the calculation you couldn't do both. Maybe they're right, but we don't know. One thing he hasn't done is change Washington.
Well, he a lot of Democrats will say that he inherited 2 wars, that the economy was
All
in the
true.
tank.
That's right.
That this was going to be a challenging road no matter what.
That's right, and I think, and that's why I think there are ways that he could have exerted the change on Washington and still gotten the big things done. One of them, so it would have been a little thing, and I go through this story in the book, but it had to do with the decision not to veto this spending bill. Very early on, a spending bill that was loaded up with stuff that he said he was not, he didn't want to have. It had earmarks, and he was against earmarks. He made a big deal of it, and he had the campaign advisors that were on the White House staff told him, veto this bill. The Axelrod, the Gibbs. The Washington guys that he hired on his staff, Rahm Emanuel, Jim Messina, those guys who were Capitol Hill guys, said, don't do it. You're going to make your life miserable with Democrats on Capitol Hill. This is what happened to Bill Clinton. This is why he couldn't get health care passed. So Obama, who is very much a very political pragmatist in his head, you can say he's not, some people will say, well, he's not a pragmatist on issues, but he's a pragmatist. It's sort of what can get him in. So he made what he decided, he sided with the Washington guys. But he signs the bill and then lectures them. Well, don't do this again. But if you look back on it, it's a moment where he capitulated to the Democrats, the House Democrats. He didn't sort of show his own independence and make his own mark in Washington. Imagine the conversation. So what if David Obey and Nancy Pelosi were mad at him for that moment in time? Does it open up an avenue where some Republicans say, oh, this guy is, maybe there are some ways we can work with him. We don't know how that would have played out, but I think that was an important moment that it could have changed his relationship with Congress.
Yeah, that kind of politics is called on-the-ground politics or retail politics. Mm-hmm. You hear about it all the time, and it's been made legendary by people like LBJ and even Bill Clinton.
Right.
And I wondered to what degree, though, the idea of retail politics is sort of romanticized after the fact. When you look back at some of these people...
Well, this is backroom politics, though. This is sort of, I mean, I hear you on the look, I think some of this stuff, I definitely think the LBJ days are getting romanticized to an absurd degree, right? I'm sorry. It's not the way Bryan Cranston is portraying it on Broadway. God love him, you know. But I do think he was not engaged enough in how to, if you wanted to work that system, there needed to be more elbow grease in how you did it. And I think that he went about it in perfectly rational boardroom type ways, the way a CEO might do it. Well, this is just, it's obvious we're going to end up compromising here, so let's just get to this point. Let's not fuss around with it. It's just not how that town works. So sometimes you have to learn the rules to change the rules.
So the idea of partisanship, did President Obama, was he aware of what he was walking into? Did he understand that he was not only inheriting other elements, but he was inheriting a culture of partisanship that goes back to other presidents?
See, I think he really, this is a case, and this may be naivete or believing your own. I think they really believed, they thought the message his election was sending. Here was a guy who got an African American who got 53% of the national vote, highest number for a Democrat going back. But you have LBJ, and then before then, one of the FDR elections. So a dominant win when you think about it in the modern era. They believe that win alone, the symbolic aspect that the country, that a majority of white Americans ended up supporting a president of the United States, a majority of his vote, and it wasn't a majority of all white Americans, but a majority of his vote was still white. So you had large number, particularly in the battleground states. So this was that it would change the tenor, at least, of the debate. That's something I think he thought was going to happen, and that's something I think they believe their own hype too much.
You know, you use the word hype. There was definitely an element of marketing to the Obama campaign. He had whipped up a new group of supporters that had never voted before into an excited state. I mean, there was a feverish pitch when he was elected. The night he was elected in Chicago was one of those memorable moments in politics.
Unbelievable moment, yeah.
Yeah, it was great. But at the same time, when you whip somebody up into that level of excitement, you bring new people in, it's almost inevitable that they're going to fall off a cliff of reality when real Washington, hand over fist politics, slow-moving politics,
no
stuck in the slogging.
And this is something they've never, the code they didn't crack, and this is something, again, why I call it a second draft, and I'm not even pretending it's a final draft. Because I think there's a couple of things we don't know about the age that we're living in. It's possible any president living in this age is going to drown from this crisis a day atmosphere. That whether it's social media, whatever, I don't know who you want to blame here, but it does feel as if, I'm sure you feel, everybody feels this way. Everything feels like a crisis in the moment and it disappears in a week. We can go through, look at the summer of 2014. We can go through all the different stories. We can go through all the different stories that seem like they were the be-all, end-all of that moment, and then they disappear. He has struggled. Events have certainly controlled him more than he's been able to control the events. Is that because of the time we live in? And any president would find this. Did a campaign that was so good at talking, using social media, using modern communications, how did they get so good at it during the campaign and not figure out how to do it governing? That to me is, if you're doing an after-action report on Obama's presidency, you'd say, you talk about all these new people you engaged. They knew they needed to have a plan to keep them engaged, but it never worked. Why? And I don't have a good answer for that. You know, maybe it's just politics is that disappointing. I don't know.
You've talked about it a number of times. You've sort of said this is not the definitive account, that things can change.
No, because I don't want to pretend that it is. I know it's not. You know.
So in that regard, something like the healthcare, which is so many people have gone after, obviously, in this moment, could that become a legacy element for him that actually turns the tide in 10, 20 years?
I think it's the single most important thing for him. I mean, I think for better or for worse, his presidency almost. It's funny. I think he deserves more credit for the stimulus and for the economic sort of recovery. The public hasn't given it to him. I think over time they might. But it doesn't matter. Healthcare is going to be. I mean, that was his signature. He spent all of his political capital doing it, and arguably his presidency's been on the defensive ever since. So he put it all in there. So I think you can't help but say that as healthcare goes, so goes the Obama presidency, as far as his history is concerned. You know, if it continues to each year look like it's working a little bit better, it's more entrenched, then I think over time it will continue to slowly sort of justify what he did.
It's fascinating stuff. I want to switch gears real quick and ask a couple questions, because you are now the host of Meet the Press.
Yeah.
You are a longtime Washington journalist. You came up through the hotline
Better
in
for
other
worse.
areas. You moved over to NBC, and now you're Meet the Press.
Yeah.
Meet the Press is this vaunted position, obviously,
Scary.
and here you sit. Can you talk just a little bit about the transition from being one of those journalists grinding out your days, like so many of them, and now you're in this position of authority as a host of a major political program? Well,
part of it's still unsunk in. I'll admit that. It is still, look, I held the chair in very high regard. I still hold the chair in high regard. I don't know if I'm yet worthy. I think it takes a while for you to become worthy of the chair and to learn the ropes. I feel like I'm still learning the ropes. You know, we're not at a crisis moment in the media, but we're at an important inflection point in, I think, political media, in that we're not doing this well. Let's not pretend that we're covering politics as well as it can be covered. Everything is, you know, the clickbait way of politics that gets covered, and, you know, look, all of the major, you know, you can't just be the New York Times and sit here and say, oh, it's BuzzFeed that does it or Politico does it. New York Times does it too. Everybody is doing this clickbait style of political coverage, you know, just whatever it takes to get a click. It's sort of taking the whole, you know, what TV used to be accused of only worrying about ratings. You know, if it bleeds, it leads, and all this stuff. And now we're like the political media and how we allow sort of social media activism. And there's hardcore liberals and hardcore conservatives that drive traffic, and now people just write headlines and stories just to get their traffic. So we're actually not covering politics very well. So I sort of am fired up about the opportunity to, like, you know, can I make Meet the Press sort of this comfortable place again where you have good, robust political debate that sort of keeps the edge, keeps it from getting too polarizing, where you feel like where you feel like you're going to at least have a sense of what the solution to the problem could be. So, I mean, I sort of, on one hand, I'm humbled by the opportunity, but I'm ecstatic that I get it now when we're in this, I think, close to a crisis moment in journalism.
And what do you think of the future of the Sunday shows? I mean, that was once the moment where everyone would stop and you'd pay attention to those shows, and then a couple more came along, and then we had 24-hour media, and then it sort of flooded the marketplace with commentary.
Look, I am sort of in the I'm in a glasses half full mindset on network television, all broadcast news in general, because I do feel like there's such a saturation now every day and every hour that you do get the sense that people want somebody that's like, well, what did it all mean? And I think Sunday morning can serve. Look at monthly magazines are starting to become popular again. Why? Because people want to sort of, wait a minute, can we digest everything? There's still a market for that. Yeah. So I think if I can make sure, I don't want Meet the Press to be another cable show. If it's turning into a cable show, I'm doing something wrong. You know what I mean? That whole feel, and you know, we even have that. Nope, that's cable. We're not doing it that way. You know, we gotta not have that. And I think that that's where there's room. Like why, like network news television is not going down, but cable news ratings are going down in general. Like why is that? I think it's almost people are so inundated with stuff that they do look for some place that curates it all for them maybe every day, and they do that at night, and possibly then on Sunday, okay, what did all that mean? Make sense of that mess.
Great. Well, it's really great to talk to you. The book is The Stranger, Barack Obama in the White House. Chuck Todd, Meet the Press host, cool. Author, busy guy, and a Miami resident. Or
Miami is really
Miami
cool.
Resident.
A former Miami resident.
That's
yeah.
right. So it's
unincorporated Dade County.
Thanks very much. Great to talk to you. Yeah. Good luck with everything.
I appreciate it.